Thanks very much, Sadharaja. Thank you for your introduction. It's interesting, Sadharaja said that I've been ordained a long time and I've got lots of experience, but this is my first talk on Zoom. So I've been very impressed with old hands like Arthapriya, Samudra Ghosha, Sadharaja, Vijayasaki and others, Arthapriya, who've given talks on Zoom, but this is my first talk on Zoom. So I'm a bit of a technophobe too. I'm probably that age, but I'm warming to Zoom. So first of all, I'd like to say a little bit about how I became a Buddhist. It is connected. I became a Buddhist towards the end of 1982, quite a long time ago. Not by going to a Buddhist center, not by reading any Buddhist books, not by meeting any Buddhists, but by listening to this tape. I found this old tape, and this is the tape I listened to. Somebody kindly recorded it for me, and it was a BBC radio program, and it was Christmas Humphrey's life. And he got actors to read out stories from the life of the Buddha, and it was a Kiss a Go to Me story that really got me. I thought I knew what it was going to be about, and it completely turned any idea of that on its head. And at the end of that recording, I was a Buddhist. I didn't meet any Buddhists for at least a couple of years, and I was a Buddhist, and I didn't know anything about Buddhism. Except what was on this particular tape. So I set out for the big bookshop in town, and don't forget there was no internet then. There was no kind of Googling what is Buddhism. I set out for the bookshop in town. There were two books on Eastern religion, the Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, and the Dhammapada. And it was this particular version, Juan Mascaro's version of the Dhammapada that I found. And I'm really glad it was the Dhammapada, because the Dhammapada is very, very accessible. In a way, it's quite aphoristic. So you have these verses, and they're accessible, they're profound, but they are deceptive in a certain way, because you really might be affected, as I was, by them. They might impact you, but you need to dig deeper into yourself. You need to dig deeper into them. Otherwise, you read the verse, you think, gosh, that is deep, and you move on. And the point is, I'm sure the Buddha's point was that it's about changing us. Yeah, so I felt I met the Buddha in the story of Kisagotami, and I felt I was sitting at the feet of the Buddha reading the Dhammapada. So last week, as Sadharaja has already said, Arthapriya introduced us to the first two verses. And I just wanted to say again, to reiterate that those verses say that mind is primary, that what your mind turns to, that's what you become. That's what you become. You can think, can't you? Because it's private, your thoughts are private, that it's just a thought. That's all it is. It's just a thought. Buddhism says it's more than that. Thoughts actually come out through speech, come out through action. Thoughts have an effect. And particularly if thoughts are thought again and again, if you return to the same kind of thoughts again and again, you become a certain kind of person. And this is very true for the verses that I'm going to look at tonight. So don't forget that thoughts count. So tonight, the verse, very, very simple, is not by hatred, or hatreds ever pacified here. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. And I remember reading that all those years ago, back in 1982, and feeling that I was encountering something really profound. But it was so spare in a way. It was so simply put that it was hard to know how I was going to take that into my life. To do that, I needed to meet with Buddhists. I needed to actually enter the Buddhist path. It's very, very succinct, isn't it? Not by hatred, or hatred's ever pacified here. Another version from another Dhammapada says, hatred is never conquered by hatred, it is only conquered by love. Now, Chris was asking in the break which Dhammapada copy to get hold of. And I would say definitely get hold of Bhante Sangharakshita's translation of it. But I would say get hold of a few more, because each Dhammapada brings out something, sheds a light on something. So definitely get Bhante's translation, but have a look at others too. Now, this phrase, hatred is never conquered by hatred, hatred is never pacified by hatred. It's obvious in a way, isn't it? It's kind of clear that that is the case, but it's not how we respond. If we fall out with someone, if we polarize with someone, and they say hard things to us, they say challenging things to us, we tend to pay them back in their own currency, don't we? I know it's very, very easy to do that, because feelings are kind of stirred up. I want to say a little bit about some of the phrase, and then I'll go into it in more detail. So the Buddha says that this is the eternal law, that only love conquers hate. So that means in all situations, in all circumstances, wherever you are, it is true. There are no exceptions to that. Hate never pacifies hatred. Hate never gets rid of hatred. That is true at all times and in all places. But the word hate, a bit like the word love, it can be used so kind of loosely, can't it? It can be used to mean, like we say we hate cabbage, or maybe we hate Mr. Trump, or we hate getting old. I've just taken delivery of hearing aids, and I know some people, older people I've spoken to, hate getting old. You can oppose particular things, but you cannot oppose old age. It's just bigger than us. And if you hate old age, if you oppose old age, you don't get the sweetness that comes with old age. There are treasures that come with getting older. I could give a whole talk on that, but I've got no time tonight. One of the most destructive forms of hatred is self-hatred. We make a mistake. Human beings make mistakes, don't we? And we hate ourselves for it. It's very, very destructive, and it brings no benefit if we hate ourselves. We need to learn from the mistakes we make, but self-hatred, forget it. It is corrosive, it is poisonous. It never, in my experience, helps. And hatred comes in intensities too, doesn't it? It comes in degree of intensity, from mild aversion to war, to genocide, to murder. All those terrible, terrible things come out of kind of hatred. Now, I want to make a distinction before I move on, a distinction that Bhante makes that I find really helpful. He makes a distinction between anger and hatred. Now, very often, including in Buddhist texts, you see the words used interchangeably. Very often, people see them as synonymous. But Bhante says that anger isn't always unskillful. He says that sometimes anger is just dammed up energy, obstructed energy. We feel something strongly, and we feel something is blocking our expression of that. It can happen. It can happen one-to-one with a friend. You know, you're trying to get a serious point over to a friend, and they're just not listening. They're digging their heels in, and maybe you say, you know, for God's sake, listen to me. You know, and you manage to break through. And Bhante said one of the ways of telling that anger has not become hatred is that you feel, when you've broken through, you feel that connection. You feel warmth towards a person. If you feel cold, if you feel polarized from them, if you feel separated, your anger has come to be hatred. And he says you have to be very, very mindful with anger. It's a bit like you're dealing with nitroglycerin or something. You're standing on a knife edge, and it can go either way. So you need to be very, very careful. But it doesn't have to be hateful. And we feel something strongly, we feel something kind of passionately, and it might be an injustice. It might be coming out of something like Black Lives Matter. It might be climate change. It might be some other issue that you feel very, very strongly about, very, very passionately about. And that anger can be fueled. It can be fueled into action. And so much of the time we feel things, don't we? And we don't feel strongly enough, so we don't do anything. The biggest problem is sort of apathy. But anger can actually get us, going. It can be channeled positively, but it needs to be done with mindfulness. Actually, awareness is absolutely vital with anger. We can lose mindfulness easily when we're in the presence of strong emotion, either our own strong emotion or the strong emotion of other people. So let's say we're on a demonstration, and we're demonstrating for something that actually is very, very worthy. It's a very, very good cause. But there we are with other people who feel the same, and we meet opposition. We meet a counter demonstration, or we meet the police, and the police are trying to kind of direct us away from where we want to kind of go. And we need to be mindful. We need to remember, why we're there. We need to remember our values. One of the ways you know that you've lost the values if the opposition and the police become, in a way, the enemy. If you see them as just not as human beings like you, but as kind of obstructions. And that can very, very easily happen. Doesn't have to happen. Some demonstrations can be very good-natured, stay good-natured, but you need to be mindful if you feel very, very strongly about something. Yeah, but it can be channeled. Yes, hatred is divisive. That's a difference between hatred and anger. You can feel angry and you can still feel connection. Anger is divisive. It tends to split us into us and them. It seeks, when it's really strong, to destroy. to push away, to even annihilate. With hatred, you stop seeing the person. As I say, you start seeing the enemy. Hatred begets hatred. When you look at kind of revolutions, actually, sometimes revolutions have been sparked off by great injustice. And you have an upsurge, you have a real sweeping away of the old order. But unless that is coming from a good place, unless the people in the revolution are aware of what's going on in their minds, as long as it's not fueled by hatred, if it is fueled by hatred, you just get the same old thing. And sometimes it's worse than the thing that was kind of replacing it. You don't need to take my word for it. If you look at history, it's replete with examples like that. It really is. There's one revolution there I want to kind of mention that is quite different. The Dharma revolution in India. The Dharma revolution is based on Buddhist principles. It's a revolution that is trying to change society, and it comes out of oppressed people. But those oppressed people in India are reaching out to beyond their particular grouping. The Dharma is for everyone. It's not just for a particular group, it is for everyone. So it's a peaceful revolution. I don't know whether there have been peaceful revolutions at other times in our history, but the Dharma revolution is a peaceful revolution. Again, so much could be said about that. No time this evening. One other place, I think, to watch out for anger and hatred is social media. Oh my goodness, social media. I was looking at some threads on social media. I don't often look, but I was looking the other day, and some of the things that people write are really shocking, actually. They would surely not say those things if the person was there. Well, hopefully they wouldn't say those things if the person was there. But maybe one feels one can say it because it's sort of removed. We're rather alienated from people by the computer, by the online kind of medium. And I think Zoom and Sangha evening on Zoom is a demonstration of being online and how it can be used for the positive. So on social media, you might really disagree with somebody's point. It's completely understandable if you do, but just watch how you respond to that. There is a person on the end of that. They may not be treating you as a person, but don't pay them in the same kind of coinage. I remember Bhante Sangharakshita saying, I think in the 10 Pillars of Buddhism, where he's talking about the 10 precepts, he says that to the extent you treat another human being as less than a human being, you become less than a human being. So if you demean somebody, if you try and reduce them as a human being, they're not reduced, you are reduced. You've stepped back from your humanity if you do that. It's a very important kind of point, I think. Anyway, my approach tonight is not going to be theoretical or analytical. I'm not going to be looking at states of mind. I'm going to be talking about my own state of mind. I'm going to give you an example of when I fell foul of hatred. And when you look at the Dhammapada, it's very, very pithy. And I imagine the verses of the Dhammapada came out of an exchange the Buddha had with someone. Someone came along to see the Buddha, told him their story, and then the Buddha responded. And the response is the verses of the Dhammapada. Now, there are stories connected with the verses of the Dhammapada in the commentary, but I must say some of the stories must have been, they must have been tacked on hundreds of years later, because they didn't work for me. Not this one anyway. It didn't work for me. So imagine that I'm that person. I'm that person who goes up to the Buddha, sits at the Buddha's feet, and I tell him my story that I'm going to tell you now. And it's a well-rehearsed story, and I'm hoping for a particular kind of response from the Buddha. So let me just take a sip of tea. It all happened a long time ago, as maybe the best stories do. It happened more than 25 years ago, and I had been working on a project, the most challenging project that I have ever worked on up until then, but probably the most challenging project in my whole life. It was so stressful, and it was stressful for most of the time we were doing it, but particularly towards the end of the project. And the project went on for a couple of years. It almost broke me. I have to say that it almost broke me. And I was working with a team of other order members and mitras, and I was working particularly with another man. We were people who held the most responsibility in the project. And this man was very, very talented, very, very creative. That was part of the problem. Made me feel really inept. Anyway, at the end of the project, something happened. As I saw it back then, he did something to me that was extremely painful. And I couldn't believe that he'd done it. And at first, I was numb. And then I was really, really angry. And I was so angry. And I couldn't, express it. Probably a good thing. And meditations were full of this. And I did metabhavana after metabhavana. And I think those metabhavanas did have an effect, but the early metabhavanas with him as the fourth person, oh goodness, it was difficult. And I look back on my time in the project with him, and of course, looking back in the way that I was doing, I found lots of evidence, further evidence, for how badly he treated me. Now, in the verses before this verse in the Dhammapada, there are some verses that say, he beat me, he robbed me, he abused me. The person who entertains such thoughts will not pacify their hatred. Well, I was that person. I really was that person. I did lots of prapancha, that is proliferation, rehearsing it again and again. When it died down, I kind of warmed it up again. And the only good thing about this was I wouldn't let people side with me. And some people wanted to. Some people felt, I too had been treated in a shocking way, but I wouldn't let them kind of side with me. But it was very, very painful. All I could see was his faults. All I could see was what he had done to me. And I was innocent. I was completely innocent. And well, maybe I was a bit innocent at the beginning, but as it proceeded, I wasn't innocent. But I just couldn't see that, because of the strength of feeling. And I remember one day doing a devotional practice, and it felt like the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas were saying to me, Arthapriya, just a moment, isn't there something you have forgotten? And they were right. Slowly, I began to see that I was contributing to this. Wasn't just him and me innocent. I was contributing to this. I was a bit like the man in Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, the man who out of hatred seizes a hot burning coal in his hand and he chases his enemy up the road. And if you're doing that, even if you get a good shot in, you might miss. But one person definitely is going to be burnt, and that is the person holding the coal, and that was me. You've got the story of the two arrows, haven't you? Somebody fires an arrow into us, and it's really, really painful, and we get, we want to blame someone. We get into a hateful state of mind, and by doing that, we put another arrow in. So now we've got two arrows in, and so I definitely put another arrow in doing this. It took me ages to see that I was behaving unskillfully, that I was actually hating him. It took me ages to see that because I was justifying it. I'd got a nice story, all kind of justified to to take the attention, take my attention off me. And when I saw this, when I saw what I was doing, I felt so foolish. I felt so sort of, how could I, a Buddhist, not have seen this? But I didn't see it. I didn't get into self-hatred. I learned from that. I've done it again since, but not not to the same degree. It's a hard lesson to learn, let me tell you. I decided to write to him and confess and apologize. That was difficult because I thought, oh goodness, he's going to think he hasn't done anything, and I'm going to have to take all the blame, But in the end, I realized that it was my karma. If he'd done something wrong, that would, the consequences of that would unfold. I didn't need to sort that out, but I did need to work with my own kind of ill will. So I'm sure the Buddha would have said to me after telling him that story, hatred, Arthapriya, is never pacified by hatred. It's only pacified by love. And the moral of the story, that cautionary story, is resolve conflicts soon. Don't let hot anger become cold hatred. So in the groups, I'd like you to talk about, are there grudges? Are there resentments that you're still holding on to? Because if there are, and there may be, if there are, then part of you, part of your mind, part of your energy is caught up in that, is imprisoned in that. You need to free yourself from that. So I'd like, if you will, to open that up in the groups. The moral of the story, yes, is to resolve conflict soon. We need help. We need the help within. The Metabhavana is such a valuable resource, hugely valuable. And that really made all the difference. I don't know where I would have been without the Metabhavana. We need to develop a dharmic perspective on life, not a worldly perspective on life, a dharmic perspective on life. We need outer help. We need our spiritual friends, friends who will not collude with us, friends who will side with our integrity and not kind of our weakness, I suppose. So yes, hatred is divisive. Hatred divides, it embitters, it divides families, it divides friends, it divides nations. Only love overcomes hatred. Now, I want to read something to you from Martin Luther King at this point. I discovered this quote, and it's so reminiscent. I'm sure Dr. King must have read these verses in the Dhammapada. He says, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So reminiscent, isn't it, of these Dhammapada verses? And another quote from Bhante this time. This is from the 10 Pillars of Buddhism again. And he says, oh, before I do that, I want to quote a terrible translation of the Dhammapada from 1902 that says, instead of love overcoming hatred, he says, by meekness are hatreds calmed. This is an ancient doctrine. By meekness. No, no, no. Meekness will not do it. Meekness will not overcome hatred. The Buddha did not encourage kind of meekness. So I want to kind of finish with this. This is actually I'm going to say another quote. This is some of the Metta Sutta, and I'll finish with this because I'm running out of time. May everything that lives be well, weak or strong, large or small, seen or unseen, here or elsewhere, present or to come, in heights or depths, may all be well. Have that mind for all the world. Get rid of lies and pride. A mother's love for her baby. Her love, but now unbounded. Secure this mind of love. No enemies, no obstructions, wherever and however you may be. It is sublime, this. It escapes birth and death, losing lust and delusion, and living in the truth. Thank you.